Good evening, everyone. I'm Anna Bogutskaya, and I will be your host for today's outstanding debut BAFTA film session. This virtual series celebrates the nominees from this year's British Academy Film Awards. Now, before we begin and dig into our interviews with our wonderful guests tonight, a few housekeeping bits. You can join the conversation online using the hashtag EEBAFTA, so do chime in with your thoughts on the session online. If you've got a question for our panelists today, use the Q&A function, and there will be some time towards the end of the session to get to as many questions as we possibly can. And also closed captioning is available as of now, and you can turn it on at the bottom of your screen via the CC button. So we have a full house joining us this evening from all of the nominated films. And we've got Jack Sidey, the writer and producer of Moffie, which was also written by Oliver Jimenez and produced by Eric Abram. We've got Rose Glass, the writer-director, and Oliver Kassman, the producer of Saint Maud, which was also produced by Andrea Cornwell. We've got Remi Weeks, the writer-director of His House. Also, Ben Sharrock, the writer-director, and Irune Gurtubai, the producer of Limbo, which was also produced by Angus Lamont, and Theresa Ikoko, the co-writer of Rocks. So I will be speaking to each individual representative of each film for about 10 minutes. And then afterwards, we will join all of us together for a conversation and a Q&A, and that will be your chance to ask questions. So feel free, again, to pop your questions for the entirety of the session in the Q&A box, and I'll try to get to as many of them as possible afterwards. So to kick off the session, can I please ask Jack to turn on his camera and join us? Hey, Jack.
Hello, thanks for having me.
First of all, massive congratulations on Moffie and on your nomination as well.
Thank you very much.
So I've got a couple of questions for you, and just to start our chat, the story is based on the autobiographical book of the same name. And can you talk a little bit about how you came across the work by André Carl van der Merwe? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
So I joined Eric Abraham at Portobello Productions and was sort of sifting through some of the material that he'd optioned over the years and came across André's book, which is actually more of a kind of fictionalized memoir. It's somewhere between real autobiographical experiences and a bit of fantasy as well. And I gave it a read, and there was something in there that immediately struck me that I found fascinating about the idea of the army as a kind of cult, as a means of ideological indoctrination in a kind of repressive regime. And I guess that was really interesting to me because I'm the grandson of two Holocaust survivors, and so I've always been fascinated by how, these regimes create their foot soldiers, and it's not like one day suddenly people wake up and they're inherently evil. So I found that really interesting, but I still didn't know where to begin with that story. But I had been tracking Oliver Jimenez, South African director, for a number of years and had greatly admired his work. So I set myself the task of convincing him to do the movie or concentrating on anything else. And I took, the next plane to Cape Town, went to meet him there, and it went from there.
And can you talk a little bit about that collaboration with him?
So I guess it started off with a development process, and we had a couple of other writers take a stab at it. And then after a while, he got to a point where he felt like we knew the story that we wanted to tell, so we should take it on ourselves. And we began sort of pinging the script back and forth for a good couple of years, and every now and then I would fly out to South Africa and I'd meet him there and we'd get into the heavy arguments of development.
And it feels like such an incredibly ambitious project for a debut feature. And can you talk a little bit about some of the more specific challenges that you faced in bringing Moffie to the screen?
Yeah, I mean, we were making an indie movie that is a Afrikaans language period LGBT war drama. It's definitely not an easy one to start with. But you know, we had amazing people on side that helped when we were facing, you know, the challenges of shooting in South Africa. We had snakes, spiders, we had 40+ degree heat, we had gale force winds and flash floods and wildfires that we had to kind of escape from. So it was definitely, it was full of challenges, but I had a great South African co-producer, Theresa, and you know, just a team who, when the going got tough, God, that's cliche, but yeah, everyone really came to the fore.
Maybe it would have been easier to ask what was the least challenging bit of making the film.
Definitely, I got some great help on the shoot.
And although it is a period film, it feels really relevant today still. And did you have a feeling that the story needed to be told now specifically?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, without getting overly political, you know, you see over the last few years, we've seen I guess the buds of repressive regimes potentially bubbling. And so, yeah, I think a kind of reminder that evil is more complicated, or not evil. I mean, I think evil is maybe too strong a word, but you know, that the kind of sprouts of autocracy and repressive regimes are maybe closer than we like to think.
And before we've got time for a couple more questions with you, and I just wanted to ask you kind of a little bit about working with the cast. So did you have a lot of time to rehearse? What was that process like of working with them? I'm thinking specifically of, you know, army training or kind of any physically demanding preparation that you had to work with them on.
Yeah, so I mean, the casting process was a long thing for us. I think we cast, it took about 18 or so months to find those boys, and they ended up being a mix of actors and non-actors and people that we found. We did some TV and radio publicity to try and get people, and then we brought on the military advisor who, you know, we ran a boot camp with, who put them through their paces, who made them understand what it was like to be, you know, an 18-year-old kid in that time and place. And yeah, I think that was pretty brutal at times, but it was sort of necessary.
And before we move on to our next panelist, Jack, what can we expect from you next? Are there any projects that you are working on that you can talk about?
So Oliver Hermans, the director of Moffie, and I are writing another story at the moment, and then on the producing side, we are adapting a little Italian movie called Mid-August Lunch, which we're doing as an Irish adaptation with a director called Darren Thornton, who made an amazing first film called The Date for Mad Mary, which won the IFTA a few years ago. And that one is definitely going to be a cheerier watch than Moffie might be.
Jack, thank you so much. And can I ask Rose and Oliver to pop their cameras and their microphones on?
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Oh, Oliver, you're still on mute. There we go.
Oh, where he is. Oliver's up on mute.
First of all, just you're almost in darkness. Can you tell us where you're zooming in from?
Oh no.
I don't know.
No.
I'm up a mountain in northwest Scotland. Can you hear me? I'm trying to stand in the right place, but this might not work.
We'll do our best.
Talk to Rose. She's much more interested.
I'll be our spokesperson.
Well, Rose, let's start with you, and we'll do our best to bring Oliver into the conversation. And I wanted to ask you about your writing process first off. So I've read that you've described this as a kind of the same mod as a kind of fun, messed up character study. And did you find in the process of finding Maud as a character and of writing the script that it lended itself to the horror genre specifically?
Yeah, I think quite early on, to be honest, one of the key things when me and Oliver first teamed up on it was like he was the first person who had sort of started to get stuck into the story a little bit more in depth with, and we sort of decided that we wanted to develop it together. And I had quite a sort of crude version of the story in my head at that point. But I had like a little treatment and some mood boards, and I gave them to Oliver. And one of the first things he said was that reading it, he thought it felt like a horror film. And I hadn't thought of it in those terms at all. I think I'd sort of thought, yeah, like you said, character study, but maybe kind of thriller-ish, you know. So I think at first I resisted the idea a bit at first, but then naturally over the next couple of years before we got it in development, like properly with Film 4, and it was just this thing that we were batting back and forth together on the side, it sort of just naturally veered that way. Yeah, I knew I wanted it to be a sort of super subjective experience, and then the story that this girl was going through became increasingly horrifying, and it made sense to bring that out in how we shot it, I guess.
And Oliver, can you talk a little bit about what first drew you to Rose's idea, and that specific thing of that you saw it as a horror film before even she did?
I mean, I'd seen Rose's short film work. You know, she'd done a beautiful, amazing short in her time at the NFTS. But I also, I often say, I like some of her really low budget, you know, micro budget things she'd done. It just such a clear vision to her work and a grandness that is really compelling and exciting. So I kind of, you know, and when she sent the story, you know, you've maybe seen a quite a kind of up and down, you know, younger, ignored character. That's not totally unfamiliar, but what I thought from the very first thing was just how grand internally what was going on with Maud was, you know, and a lot of that was manifest in her kind of anger and frustration, and the extreme things that she did and was experiencing, and I felt like, you know, Rose would you know, really bring that to life in such an exciting way, which she certainly did.
And Rose, actually, on that note, there is so much intensity in Maud's character, and a lot of the film is very much seen through her point of view. Can I ask you, kind of, when did the religious framework come into play for you? Was that at the start of the story, or was that something that kind of came more down the line in development?
No, it was pretty much at the start. I think like the very initial hook was firstly being interested in doing a two-hander between a person and a voice in their head, but I think pretty quickly the voice became God, and that's probably just from having like a sort of Christian Catholic upbringing or something, so it came naturally.
And can you talk a little bit about, you know, was there anything about the story or the character specifically of Amanda and Maud that evolved once you cast Morphy Clark and Jennifer Reilly in those roles?
Yeah, for sure. Like I don't know, you sort of, when you're writing it, you sort of kid yourself by the time that you get to casting that you've created these really sort of three-dimensional things, and then you sort of see a good actor doing it and you're kind of like, I guess that's what I meant anyway, which isn't always quite. Anyway, yeah, more of it, to be honest, was a bit different. I think they were both a bit different to what I'd initially been picturing. Said it in a lot of stuff, but Amanda was initially meant to be older and English, and I don't know, I kind of was a bit nervous that either character could easily go down a far too sort of theatrical, sort of campy kind of direction, because the film does lean into that sort of style a little bit. But with more of it than Jennifer, I think particularly, they're both such fantastic, really effortless performers, and they just sort of ground what could otherwise, if done wrong, I was just always aware that the film just could be just, I don't know, ridiculous. So they ground it, they make it real, just better and more plausible. Just that's kind of what they did to it, I guess. And really fun to work with.
And for anyone who's seen the film, you'll know that kind of the locations, both Amanda's house and Maud's little studio flat, play such a big role I think, in creating tension and atmosphere and also building up the characters. Can you talk a little bit about how you envisioned or created these spaces that feel so alive and also kind of terrifying?
I think, yeah, it's just a gradual process of working with all the right people and sort of trying to be, I think from very early on, like even from just the initial discussions me and Oliver were having before it sort of all took off, from the very beginning, harvesting a kind of, trying to harbour a sort of atmosphere where everyone working on the film could be bold with it and sort of quite playful and sort of bold. I don't know, some people just might disagree and think it's boring or whatever, but for me, for us, it was important that the film be both those things. So, you know, early on, it was important to think about what the character of the house felt like, and every space had to sort of reflect more psychological journey. So so if I was talking with Paulina, our production designer, that was the, with her, or Ben, the DOP, that was like the framework of the conversation, I guess, just what's going on with Maud in this space. And in terms of like Amanda's house, this is the location where, in terms of what's happening in her, with God anyway, this house is the location of a really important, sort of dangerous, seductive kind of mission and a big turning point in her life. And it had to, so the space had to feel kind of seductive, but a bit intimidating and inviting, and texture throughout the whole film. I wanted to, you know, we wanted it to be as visceral an experience as possible, and to be have quite a sort of tangible sensualness to it, I guess. All in the aim, I guess, of you know, it's sort of being a film about, hopefully, about empathy and compassion, and getting yourself inside this girl's head, and sometimes being a bit sort of textural and icky is a good way of doing that. It's a weird answer.
That's a great answer. And really for both of you, saying Maud, even in the really bizarre year that we've had, well, terrible year that we've had in the past year with cinemas being closed and, well, a whole pandemic, panini going on, what was the release experience like for you to have your first film after a really, really successful festival run kind of be on release in 2020? And like, has there been anything really surprising from audiences, both from cinemas and people who've watched the film on demand?
I mean, I don't know about you, Oliver, but I guess because neither of us have anything to compare it to, because it's our first film and it's the first time doing all this sort of stuff and seeing it with festivals and getting a response and putting it out on DVD and all of this kind of stuff, it's all weird and new and surreal anyway. So the fact that it's sometimes been hard to sort of disentangle what is weirdness from that, and then how much the added strangeness of it all being done in this day and age. I don't know. It's been it's been a really strange year, and I have been really glad that we had the opportunity to see it with sort of festival audiences like that. And I kind of feel like, out of, if you were to release a film in this moment in history, we've had a really fortunate, charmed run of it, and sort of been really well supported by Studio Canal, particularly putting the film out in weird circumstances and blah blah blah. I think I'm going off on one though. What? Remind me again, say the question again. Was it what was the end?
Was there anything about the audience reactions either? Yeah, that has surprised you.
I'm sort of still just over the point where it's kind of like, oh, they like it, kind of thing. Like just any you know, any like jump scares, those landing with an audience is really satisfying. I think in the beginning I was a bit surprised that sort of, I'm enjoying the fact that people, the ambiguity of the ending and things like this. I don't know. Yeah, delighted that people have been chatting about it a bit, which is nice.
Been chatting about it a lot, and I wanted to ask you both. Really, it's been such a fruitful collaboration for the both of you. Do you have any plans of working together again on future projects, or what can we expect to see from you next? Now, this is it.
Yeah.
Well,
no, I mean, as a producer, yeah, no, I'm delighted to say that we are, and Rose, you know, Rose, very, you know, excitingly for Andrea, my producing partner, and I, you know, kept the partnership going, and we're working on a couple of things, and something that is, you know, quite close to you know, quite is proceeding quite excitingly through development towards production. So we're pardon?
So all I've ever said about that one when asked is just that it's a romance of sorts, and then that's it. So we're doing that, hopefully.
That's all we get. That's fine.
But it was a great team working on St. Maud, and I think we all had a really great experience working together, particularly me, Oliver, and Andrea, as you said, isn't here. So yeah, we've got a couple more things to do now.
Oh, well, I really look forward to seeing them. But thank you both for your time tonight. And can I ask Remi to turn his mic and his camera on?
Hello.
Hi, Remi.
What's going on?
How are you doing? Again, really, really good to chat to you again. And
likewise, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Well, great. And I wanted to ask you about the research that you did for his house. I wanted to ask you specifically, what sort of research did you feel like you need to do, and what sort of research did you do into to get into the perspective and the experience of South Sudanese refugees?
Yeah, I mean, we did so much research on this project. I think there's so many different areas we had to look into. Obviously, we had to look into the immigration process in the UK, and so we did a lot of research into, I guess, from detention centres to how asylum seekers are settled. And I worked with a researcher, and we did a lot of interviews, and we talked to lots of people. And aside from that, we also did a lot of research into the migration journey from Africa into Europe, and as well as South Sudan. And again, we were working with researchers and people who could help instruct us, not just through the pre-production and development, but also on the shoot, and working with the actors, and kind of making sure there was always someone around us that if we were messing up, they could tell us off and make us do it the right way. So yeah, we had quite a bit.
And in terms of the building and the story and the characters especially, what was the most important part of all of that research that you did and all those conversations that you really brought into on a kind of I guess psychological or emotional level for the characters?
What was the most important research?
What was the most important bits that you took from all of that research and all of that work to really build the emotional backbone of the characters?
Well, I guess a big part of the story hinges on the idea that when you're claiming asylum, you have to adhere to really strict, very draconian rules. If you're given a house, you're not allowed to leave, and you're given very little money, and you're not allowed to find a job. And for many people, it's such a bizarre and re-traumatizing experience, especially when you don't know the country and you're housed in a very suburban and disorientating place. And so that was, I guess, how we, that was, I guess, the anchor to the entire story. So I'd say that.
And was it always a plan, or why was it important to tell this story, which is written in so many people's real life experiences through the medium of horror?
I enjoy about horror and suspense is that it enables you to. I think cinema is quite a superficial medium. It's very much about images and what you see, and so often it's quite hard to peer inside someone's mind. And horror seems to be able to do that in a way that a lot of other genres can't do. You get to be subjective, and you get to be you get to create quite literal, the kind of abstract emotions that are inside someone's mind, especially when it comes to fear and anxiety. And so I guess that's why.
And on that note, actually, can you talk a little bit about how you directed your cast, especially in the more horrific scenes that have the more supernatural elements?
Oh man, I just shops and wombs, man. Like I just, you kind of get them on set, and then you step back, get out the way. They So it's funny asking like how I directed them. It's just like I trusted them, and I think they trusted me, and we had a great time together, and I was just all I was ever really doing was being their cheerleader. And when they had ideas, finding ways to incorporate them and talking about stuff and having fun and developing our characters together. So.
And was there any particular horror films or horror performances that you used as inspirations and that helped Wumi as Shoppy as well?
No, Wumi doesn't like horror films. She wouldn't watch one with me. And Shops is like he has the mind of a scientist. He's got a book full of questions, and so that was how we all work together.
And can you talk a little bit about the production design of the film, which does so much to help the story and to get into, I think, the character's state of mind as well? Did you always think of the production design in the house, and also the other sets that we get in the film, kind of the street, the shops, all of that, as deliberately visualizing the character's state of mind?
Yeah, kinda. So I was working with Jacqueline Abrahams, who is amazing, and she was obviously excited about this film, was being able to have a house, but then being able to deconstruct it throughout the film, and by doing that, being able to tell a story. And we really went to town. I like when you can make something feel authentic, but then gradually twist it and make it surreal. And so we found a real house in Tilbury, and from that real house we began to, as I said, deconstruct it and make it abstract and play with proportion and do really fun stuff with it. Yeah, it's great.
And can you talk a little bit about the more horrific scenes of the film, and kind of, was there ever a point where you felt like you were going too much or too supernatural, or did it? Yeah, that's my question. Was there ever a point where you felt like you were going into too much horror? If that's
all the
even
time.
a thing.
I feel like I don't know, man. Like I'm constantly questioning and thinking and trying things out, and especially through the edit, where you could theoretically shift the edit to kind of pull against slightly different tones or genres. There was always a conversation about how far to go in any direction. But I think where we landed was one where I think we all felt like this was the sweet spot.
And I mean, when the film was released on Netflix, which it kind of reached a huge global audience, has there been anything that's been really surprising to you about the way that people have received the film?
It's really hard to know, because it's so like surreal, the whole experience, and I'm not very online. I don't really have a social media presence, and so I'm not really seeing much. And also I'm stuck in my house, so I'm not really able to get out and see what other people are saying. So I feel like it all feels a bit like a dream, or I'm still convinced that this is like a really long con, and my flatmates playing this long trick on me, and all this is make believe, because all I'm getting is from a computer, and and so it still doesn't 100% feel like it's actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole big trick. We're all behind this. But before we move on to our next panelist, I wanted to ask you, kind of, do you think with your next projects, do you feel like you're going to stay within the genre?
To be confirmed.
Okay. Remi, thank you so much for your time. And can I please ask Ben and Irune to turn on their cameras and microphones for me? Hello.
Hi.
Hi both. Thank you so much for your time. And Ben, if I can start with you to begin with, can you talk a little bit about what came first with Limbo? When did this project begin for you?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, so I'll kind of try and be succinct, because it's something that
we've got 10 minutes.
Yeah, it goes back kind of like 12 years. It probably starts with my undergraduate degree before I went into filmmaking, which was in Arabic and politics. And I spent my third year of university studying in Syria, in Damascus. And then I suppose, I obviously, it was a bit kind of my formative years, so I have incredible memories there and kind of made friends there. And I think in general, when you study a degree in Arabic and politics, you also focus a lot on the kind of the sort of Orientalism and the idea of the construction of the other. And I came back from my third year for my final year of university, and I ended up specializing in Middle Eastern cinema, and then that's really kind of what inspired me to go on into filmmaking. And I wrote my dissertation on Arab and Muslim representations in American cinema TV. This sort of stuck with me. I then went to film school. I was really interested in the kind of broad subject matter of the refugee crisis, really before it became the refugee crisis. And this is where me and Irune met. And at that point, I wrote a short film that was set in the Sahrawi refugee camps in southern Algeria. So we went out there and worked with an NGO. We stayed with a family there in the camps, and we were working on a project that was specifically about identity and how the label of being a refugee affects identity. And we were also kind of out there, developing the short film idea as well. We came back. Then we actually, the university, we couldn't get the insurance to go out to the camps to shoot the short film because it was too dangerous. And then we basically kind of flash forward again. I think when the refugee crisis became very prevalent in the media, I was sort of really struck by the representation of refugees in the media, and I felt that there was this kind of process of dehumanization where we had the demonizing of refugees on one side and the pitying of refugees on the other side, and there wasn't this kind of gap in the middle where we were just kind of looking at them as human beings like us. And I was, at that point, I was also kind of still in touch with the friends that I'd made in Syria, and I basically I knew that I wanted to write a film about this subject matter. So that was really the starting point, was the subject matter, and then figuring out how to do that. And I basically started off with a big list of things to avoid when approaching the subject matter. And
Irune, I would like to ask you about that list of things, but Irune, to bring you in a little bit, can you talk about the specific challenges of producing a film like Limbo, in that in between, like Ben was mentioning, of a lot of interest in the subject matter and a lot of pitying and also a lot of demonization of refugee stories? Kind of, as a producer, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
I mean, I think from the producing side of things, like, we were, I guess, in that sense, trying to also do all the research that obviously came with the writing, and but also in terms of approaching the film, trying to have all the people that helped us, that had been through the asylum system in the UK and were now refugees in the UK, who wanted to also kind of participate in the film as extras, and kind of, I guess, bring that reality to the film, I guess. but I think in terms of producing, the most challenging thing about the film was probably the location where we shot, because obviously we ended up shooting in the Uists, in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland, which is a place that is definitely not ready for, you know, a film crew to arrive and set camp there. So yeah, so I think that was the very challenging thing, just making sure that even, you know, there was a way for everyone to arrive there and accommodation for everyone. And then obviously the weather we had to face every day, like just standing in the wind and rain and hail. And yeah, I think it was very physically challenging as well in that sense. Yeah.
And can I ask you both, really, picking up on something that Ben said, of kind of what were some of the things, what was that list of things that you wanted to make sure to avoid when making Limbo?
I mean, I think the kind of top things on the list, I guess, were kind of using a Western character as a vehicle to tell a story about refugees. So it was kind of very important for me early on to have the refugees front and center and to have them as the lead characters, and for it to be about their sort of the kind of internal kind of introspective journey of these characters. And then, you know, obviously the sensationalizing of the subject matter as well, falling into the trap of kind of that, particularly on a sort of liberal left side, would be the pitying side of things. And then I think another major aspect for me was this kind of cultural reconciliation narrative, which we often see in stories about refugees, which I feel like it detracts from the actual central character-driven journey of the refugee characters.
And one of the things that I found so interesting about Limbo is kind of this deadpan comedic element to it as well. And can you, and really for both of you, kind of, was it important, or was it always in the script, these absurdist moments and these touches of humor in the story?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think it's sort of it's something that I feel is quite integral to me as a filmmaker. So it wasn't kind of a case of going, I want to make a film about refugees and I'm going to make it a comedy. It was kind of from the beginning, you know, really what I'm interested in general is kind of, I am interested in socio-political or political subject matter, and then looking at that from an oblique angle and using a certain type of absurdist or deadpan humor within it. So that was kind of really built in from the very beginning in the process of writing and developing the film.
Yeah, and I think there was also like a part of it that was about mirroring life itself as well, because early on in our research, we kind of came across different stories, and one of them was about a group of Syrian refugees who were crossing you know, in one of these like tiny boats that really, they had this horrible journey, and you know, they all thought kind of like they were going to die and it was horrible. But once they made it and they arrived in Greece, they were all kind of like having dinner and gathering in the evening and just like making jokes about that journey that had been so horrible, you know, where they really thought like they might die. And then, you know, after having gone through it, they were able to joke about it, because in a way it's also it can be a way of coping with that trauma.
Finding the humor in that's in their circumstances. And that was something that really we as well tested, because it was very daunting to approach this subject matter with humor, but kind of in the development process, speaking with people that had been through the asylum system and speaking with NGOs that work on a day-to-day basis with refugees, we were also kind of testing that and saying, you know, could we use, you know, almost asking for permission to use humor with the subject matter. And it really came back with a kind of a resounding yes, like, please don't do the sort of full-on straight drama kind of film.
That's so fascinating. And I wanted to ask you, kind of to wrap up our part of the chat, what would you hope ideally that audiences take away from Limbo when they watch it?
I mean, I think for me, like it's always a kind of a difficult question. I think that the thing is that, like, I really want audiences to feel connected to the characters and feel close to them and spend, you know, an hour and a half with these characters and feel like they find part of themselves in them and they feel close to them and they feel a connection with these characters. So yeah, that's really what I would like.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, and I think during our research as well, like we found that actually many of the people that we spoke to that, you know, were officially refugees and had that label, they didn't identify with that label. You know, they just happened to be someone that had to take that journey in their lives, like the same way I'm from the Basque Country and I decided to come to Scotland to live here, you know. Obviously in different circumstances, but they are just someone who had to take that journey, and their story is individual to them. And you know, hopefully Limbo also kind of allows us to connect with Omar as a person who happens to be in those circumstances.
Ben, Irune, thank you so much for your time. And can I please ask Theresa to turn on her microphone and her camera?
Hi.
Hello. Again, congratulations on ROX and on all of the nominations. And I wanted to start our chat by kind of asking, did you have, when you first started working on ROX, did you have an idea of what the narrative, what the key story was, or did it sort of develop as the project did?
It was kind of a combination of both. So we started kind of not knowing what we wanted to do, but knowing that we wanted to tell a story about girlhood, and separately I'd been working on a film about sisterhood, because I have 5 sisters, and wanted to write something to honor one of my sisters in particular, which is kind of awkward. But when we had sort of built a foundation after doing 9 months of workshopping and talking and talking about ideas and sharing, it felt like the film that I had been working on separately was really well suited to the environment of sisterhood that we were building. So I shared that, and we had the outline, we had the narrative, and then we just as a collective of storytellers and filmmakers all contributed to ideas. And then Claire and I went away with like a massive roll of white paper with lots of post-it notes and pictures and songs on it, and just little sprinkles of magic, and we turned that into a script.
I mean, that's an amazing process. So can you elaborate a little bit on that, on how especially the cast fed into the stories and kind of all that sprinkling of goodness that then you can see on the screen?
Yeah, so I think in 3 ways mainly. The first way, because we had spent so long with them already before we had started writing, before we even knew what we were writing. So I think naturally so much of them had become a part of us, and so much of us had become a part of them. For example, when I met Buki Bakray, who plays Rox, she's Nigerian British, from down the road from me, went to a school not far from the school I went to, and she very much felt like the audience I had been writing for. So I felt very connected to her and felt like I was starting to mold Rox to her. So I'm Igbo from Nigeria, ethnically I'm Igbo, Buki's Yoruba, so small things like that, making the character Yoruba. So they influenced us because we knew them the same way your friends kind of become a part of your subconscious. I think that's one way. The second way is that when we had the story outline, we put lots of pieces of paper up on the wall and just spoke to them about each scene and laughed, told stories. We then went, gave them post-it notes. They found songs, did fun exercises, and we did 2 workshops like that. So they just put loads of colour on the white and black sheets that we had, and I think that's a metaphor for really what it was to be around there. The third way they influenced the script was we were on set every day, all day. So sometimes they would try new things and ask us what we thought, and so there was constantly a bi-directional feedback. So sometimes things that we had on paper, which was my first time on set, I didn't necessarily understand that things on paper didn't always translate. I was like, why not? Just do what it says. But, you know, sometimes something, it doesn't feel right, or it doesn't connect in a certain way, or even if people do it exactly as it says on paper, it doesn't necessarily land as you would like it. And the brilliant thing about being on set all day, every day, and having such a collaborative energy was that there was constant questions between directors, ADs, cameras, writers, cast. So we were all constantly talking. So Claire and I would be rewriting sometimes, and sometimes we'd go home really inspired by something, even if it was a change in the weather. And I'd email someone in production, be like, I've just written a new scene, is that okay? And at the time I didn't realize how preposterous it was, because everyone just made it happen. But coming off that environment, I realized actually people were really working miracles for us every day. So really grateful.
And can you talk a little bit about that experience of almost creating the organic feel between the girls, especially of Rocks, through that very collaborative on-set process? Like you've mentioned that, you know, they were everyone was feeding into the script, and you and Claire would be constantly rewriting. Kind of how did you know when things kind of felt right as they were on the page, or when you needed to go away, maybe add something else? Like how did that translate into the actual dynamic on set?
I think a lot of that work came from before we even got to set. We're very fortunate that BFI and Film 4 allowed us to have such a long workshopping process. I was working in youth and community at the time, so workshops were what I was used to, and that's how Lucy Pardy, our casting director, would work. So we just spent a lot of time together, and it was really important for us that when we transferred from the workshopping environment, which was really not about even the film, it was about creating fun, safe play. I talk about play a lot in the development of it. It was never about getting them to contribute to a film or mining them for ideas. It was just about creating an environment for play and connectedness. So then when we went to shoot, it was really important that actually that environment was replicated on set. As first time makers, most of us, including myself, you know, if you've had such a lovely, warm, safe environment to go into, like maybe something that's a bit intimidating or a bit foreign would have immediately, I think, cut and undermine all the work we did. So set was also very community-based, 75% female, lots of crew that looked like our communities. So I think it was just the process of like intentionally creating community and safety, which I think was really important. And I think that's what really made it so that when we were actually doing the work, it felt natural, it felt easy. So, and I always want to stress how much the girls worked. So it feels like improvisation because of the work that came before, but there was a lot of them, they rehearsed their butts off, you know, they read their scripts. And I remember spending 40 minutes in a bathroom with Vicky sat on the floor because she really wanted to get a scene perfect. And we went through every line. We talked about intention the way you would, you know, a grown professional actor. We talked about the beginning and the end of this character's journey. We talked about emotion and motivation, and even, you know, offering her like something to make her cry. She was like, no, I'm going to get there. And that's the kind of commitment everybody had to the work and to the words and to the story and to the script.
I mean, that's incredible to hear about all of the work that then seems so seamless on screen. And can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on the reaction of audiences to seeing Rocks, and specifically kind of younger girls who are seeing Rocks?
Yeah, that's to me been the highlight of being a part of this. Just getting DMs from girls saying, this is me, or not even just young girls, like people of all ages. I feel really privileged to have been a part of so many people's childhoods and their friendship, you know, because you remember the films that remind you of your friends, you remember the films that you see with your friends, you remember the time when you tell your friend, no, that's you, or that's me, or like, you're like that. And I just think to be able to be part of those moments that might define people, like some young women, or not even just young women, young men, to dream a bit bigger, to think a bit further for themselves. And you know, there is something special about seeing yourself reflected, about the viability of your stories. You know, I personally, when I first started writing a few years ago, I remember having those conversations where the viability of our stories were questioned. So, yeah, so it's been quite special. Say I told you so to a lot of people who question that, and to make sure that some audience members will never have to have those questions, because they can always say, well, look over there.
Exactly. And to wrap up our part of the conversation, I wanted to ask you, and I hope that no one ever questions the validity of the stories that you want to tell in any room. What are you working on next? Are there particular stories that you're working on to bring to the screen next?
I'm working on quite a few things. I love centering friendship and community. So whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, or grounded contemporary, so I'm doing a bit of that. And I'm really looking forward to working with some members of the team behind Rocks again and see what more we can do. And particularly in the way that we work, that particularly challenges the whole hierarchical, patriarchal notion that film belongs to one person, or stories are authored, or certain people have the authority to tell stories. So I love how, as a collective, we've decided that we just want to just break it down from the inside. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that with them.
And I really look forward to seeing it. And we've got a few minutes for the Q&A part of this session. So can I please ask cameras back on? And I'm gonna try to get through as many audience questions that have come in as we can. So I think this is for Jack, from Lewis. How did you decide which part of Andrew's book to use in the film, as there were some story points and character moments that were left out?
I think we used his book as a jumping point. As I think I said, it was a fictionalized memoir, so we were really interested in what the real stories were in there, rather than the sort of constructed happy ending that is part of the book. And then the story, as the more and more research we did, and the more people that we spoke to, and the endless internet forums that we were on, the story started to be infused with more and more other real stories and became something else entirely.
Thank you. And this is a question for the entire panel from Helen. How much of your initial vision and idea changed by the time the film was finished and released? Is there anything that you really miss from that initial version? Whoever wants to take it first. If everyone's feeling shy, I'm going to pick someone.
I'll say that kind of, I think it changes throughout the whole process. I think, from the beginning, when it changes it throughout every stage. I think you go through, obviously, in the development, and then into the rehearsal period with the actors. And when you're working with the actors, then there are going to be changes. You go into the production, you see it on set, you're going to make changes. And then obviously, when you're in post as well with the edit, you have so many, tools, and so I think it's something that's very much evolves throughout the whole process. But it's kind of, in a way, I feel like it's still the same vision that you set out for the beginning, even though there are different things about it. It's still the film that you wanted to make. It's still kind of the vision, the core that you had. Yeah.
Rose, Remi, Theresa, would you like to add anything to that?
I mean, just to agree, it's I think doing more of anything sort of dispelled any kind of weird ideas I was holding on to about having to have this, about the script being the end of anything, like some of I mean, obviously it's an important place to start, but I really enjoyed, in terms of making our film, I kept writing scenes through the edit. We didn't, it wasn't a case of missing anything from the beginning, because we used everything that we shot from the main shoot, but then rejigged some things, and then stuff changed, and I was able to write a few quite key scenes in response to what we shot in the edit. And then we did a few extra days shooting some quite big scenes, like Beetle talking to Maud and stuff. So yeah, it's an ongoing collaborative lovely thing.
Yeah, I think similarly to Rose, we had that experience because everybody was involved in everything. I can't imagine the idea of writing a script and then walking away, because you have to be responsive, and everybody was quite fluid. And I think having an amazing editor in Maya Mafioli, who would tell us what's happening and just had such an eye and a way to tell stories. Particularly the ending, for example, was written on script differently than what it is in the film. Came about because in the Faye War, the producer had found something and thought that what they found did the ending the way the script was trying to do it, but didn't capture on shoot day, if that makes sense. So sometimes somebody can see better what is on the page than what you might see on the day of shoot. And yeah, they really, I think, had really good eyes for it, and being open to that was really important, I think.
And thank you so much for all of your answers. There's another question here from Leonardo for all of you as well. The gap between making films as an amateur and getting to a place where you can actually sell them feels really, really huge, and film schools rarely teach how to approach the industry in order to meet investors or pitch your film to distributors. Does anyone of you have any tips or suggestions on, even on a small indie scale, on how to navigate that?
It's the question about how to get to a place where you're trying to pitch your film to professionals, or is it just to
distributors? I think the core of that question is like, how do you get your film to get picked up by a distributor, to get it to a wider audience, even if it's being made on an indie scale?
So part of it's a thing of just kind of taking the time, finding the time to sort of build confidence in knowing what kind of thing you want to make and why, taking any opportunity to sort of practice it. And I guess like a lot of the time, a lot of this stuff is so kind of fluky. I mean, I just say trying to be as proactive as you can, and like throwing a lot of spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks, and like applying to a lot of, I mean, it depends what sort of stage you're at. I'm not sure which bit you're at, like short film schemes, and then sort of working on treatment in spare time, and spray stuff everywhere, and then be proactive and follow whatever leads. Really limp advice, sorry.
You know, I agree. Like, I think it's such a flimsy and kind of, there's no like one way to make it in this industry, and you never really know what's going to hit people until you make it. And so for me, it was just making films, making shorts, or writing, and just keep going. And sometimes, well, a lot of the times they might not get anywhere, but then there'll be that one film that one person sees that one day that really, you know, makes them feel something, and they see something in you, and they get in touch. And you can't really predict that. You can only just keep going.
I think,
And I'd also just add, after you, Ben.
No, you go, Oliver.
I suppose it also depends what, if the person asking this is a director or producer or writer, you know, it's like it does all depend. I mean, if you have a finished film that you've maybe done sort of not through the traditional channels, then to a certain extent it's the same as anything else. Primarily we're trying to get people to watch our films, and I think you can get a bit bogged down in a sales agent and a distributor, and you know, the sort of more traditional ways of doing things, and they are really important, and I'm not, you know, questioning that, but you kind of just want to get people to watch the films. Maybe you go to sales agents and you try and get a sales agent to watch the film. Maybe you go to distributors and online retailers. You know, you can get your films onto Amazon, you know, yourself. You can self-distribute through Amazon, and it's also important, but you kind of want to get the film in front of an audience, you know, that's who you made it for, any way you can, and as widely as you can, and then move on and do the next one, take everything you've learned and keep going. And I think people can get a bit bogged down in it should be this and it should be that, and I need to do it this way. And actually, you know, the industry is always in a mess, but the digital age has democratized it enormously, and I think that's hopefully quite exciting and helps give people access.
Yeah, I think just to add to that as well, I think everyone kind of said keep going, and I think that's really important, because it is, you know, it is really difficult, and there's kind of, you know, no illusion there. It's really difficult, so it's kind of just staying with it and kind of believing in yourself and kind of staying in the game. I think the other kind of key thing as well connected to that is to build you know, collaborators around you, kind of build relationships of people that believe in you as well, and that you trust and that will support you along the way. So yeah, I think that's also really important.
I think that's such a lovely note to end on as well, because we've just run out of time. So I just want to thank all of you once again for your time. Thank you, Theresa, Rose, Jack, Oliver, Ben, Irune, and Remi for sharing a bit more info about the thinking and the process behind the making of your films. And congratulations again on the nominations, more than well deserved. And coming up tomorrow, there is another panel of the BAFTA film sessions all with the makeup and hair nominees, so do join us for that, and check out BAFTA.org and the BAFTA's social media channels for more info and activity. And thank you everyone again, and thank you everyone who tuned in tonight.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
See you.
Bye.